Okay. Well, since Laura has done an amazing job flitting about and preparing this whole thing, I told her my neurotically over-prepared self would sort of kick us off.
Which I welcomed.
Yeah. Thankfully, I've had the great honor to have Laura on the podcast, and so we've had many a conversation, and as moms since then. But now that we move into session 3, we've been talking all about, how we got here, and now it's the after. What comes after diagnosis-driven care? And so for this part of the afternoon, Laura and I really wanted to look at something more interior. And really, I think that means that we need to ask ourselves, what happens on the inside when therapy culture becomes the main story that a person has to make sense of themselves? And so Laura and I wanted to talk about therapy culture through this lens, as this almost cultural reflex to frame emotional life through diagnosis and treatment. And for both of us, that started really early. And I personally found myself, looking for a story to frame my suffering around, and I found a diagnostic identity instead. And so I think that really what we want to talk about is what replaces all of that, and what might finding meaning look like if we stopped outsourcing our identity to labels. And so Laura, and I think many of us in this room have read Laura's book. It's so brilliant, and I felt like I was reading about my own inner head box. So me and Laura are just very similar, I think, in the way that we overthink and think and think. And I was really gobsmacked by the way that you described an early moment in your life, and it's that scene when you're standing in front of the mirror. I think you were like 12 or something, right? And it's at the beginning of the book, and she described this sudden recognition and questioning of self that I think so many teenagers feel at one point in their adolescence, but rarely have the language for. And it's this deep existential sense of questioning who you are and all the scripts that you've been handed to, from cultural scripts to family scripts to school scripts to all of them, and how they've been foisted upon you as a young person, and how becoming, it's like you wrote so brilliantly that you almost became fully conscious of that all at once as a young person, and how it had this almost psychologically fragmenting effect for you. And when I was reading it, all I could think of was that you seem to have had kind of an ego death, And I think that I would like to start off by inviting you to talk a little bit about what that moment was like for you, and what it meant to have that moment folded into a diagnostic narrative rather than maybe an initiatory or transformative one, and what you think might have unfolded if a different framework were available to you at the time.
Oh, it's a great question. And I started the book with that scene because I knew that experience I'd had of basically looking at my visage in the mirror and staring deeper and deeper into my eyes until my eyes became her eyes. And then there I was looking at this, someone other than me, having this literally out-of-body experience. I knew that was far from unique to me. I could feel it in my heart that what I experienced as a pubescent teenage girl was this archetypal awakening process of coming into yourself as a self, to recognize this discrete, identity with boundaries around it that has. What happened for me was I visualized puppet strings, this being, this little girl looking at me being controlled by these invisible masters overhead. I think whether it's, literally an experience like that or something analogous to that, when you hit puberty, when we grow up as teens, it's a rite of passage into having an awareness of yourself as at this meta level, where in childhood we are just immediately in the world. We experience it viscerally. We talked about, we both have little kids. I look at my 4-year-old and he doesn't have self-awareness. He just is. And it was the moment that I lost that I suddenly was a girl and further a stranger. And I knew that sealed the deal. It was inevitable that I'd eventually be psychiatrized, because we live in a time where there's this gaping void of ritual, of tradition, of mentorship, of guidance, of elders, of, had I been born in a different time, this could have been an opportunity to be celebrated, to be recognized as a sign of wisdom that we all have. It wasn't unique to me. That the self is it can be, I think because I didn't have those frameworks around me to help me make sense of it, I assumed it meant I was in a prison, that I was trapped in a prison, that I had no real self. I was just performing the game of life controlled by forces. Had I grown up in a different time, I would have actually been invited to view this as an opportunity, as a moment of freedom, that I was transcending self. And that's a beautiful thing. But I, of course, didn't know that. I didn't have those frames of reference, and it was only many years later that I looked back and said, wow, that's the kind of thing that you meditate for hours to reach. I don't know what set it off. It was spontaneous. And I think all of that is in each of us as human beings, this moment of coming online as a self, and then you're given a choice. Do I view this as an incarceration or as a liberation?
I feel like we numb and suppress and medicate and pathologize away initiatory moments. And, I found that when I speak to therapists on my podcast, they're so frustrated because they also feel bound and gagged by all of this, where, if suicide is even mentioned, it's, you have to think about liability, right? It's the same thing with, OpenAI. You see them, this tragic example of this young boy who got caught up with ChatGPT and he ended up taking his own life. And, you see Sam Altman coming out and making these grand statements about safety. They don't care about safety. They care about liability. And I find that frustrating, deeply frustrating. And as a young person, now stepping outside of that, I think, and I know Nick relates to this, I was the canary in a coal mine in my family system. Thankfully, I've had the ability to have very deeply healing experiences with my mom and dad. My work on the podcast was difficult for them to handle for a few years, but I had to push through that and help them understand that this isn't their fault either. It's so much bigger. It's like this huge tapestry of effed upness. And that, as Laura mentioned, there are answers in the past that we can cling to, that when we think about moving forward, there is wisdom from the past that we actually can cling to. We don't have to build everything from scratch. There is transitory times in your life, right? From going maiden to mother to crone is just one example. And there's no space for this. There's James Hillman, who talks about suicide as something in you wants to die. It's not you, literally, but because we are stuck in this Cartesian dualistic framework of we need to fix this, or this is bad, so I want to die. We've lost symbolic literacy. We've lost initiatory literacy. And if we could, I hope to teach my daughter, you will feel horrible. You will get your heart broken, but you are the crucible with that transformation needs to take place, and you become a stronger and stronger vessel over time. And the heartbreaks and the horrible feelings that you feel, these are, and I hate to get esoteric, everybody, but I'm gonna. It's that I do believe that there's a certain intelligence that is moving us towards what we need to address in our own lives, and our culture fights against that. And I do truly believe it started with, that Cartesian thing, thinking about our bodies are clocks to fix. I've studied these things that, we became very obsessed with dissections. How can we fix the human experience? But the ancients knew it was much more numinous than that. And I think that there are certain elements that we can return to. There are frameworks that already exist, right? And that's what I feel so passionate about. And it's what I have found #healing from, whatever healing is. There is no healed ED, but I've found empowerment in that, and also a safety in knowing that there are people before me that had these frameworks. So I personally found healing in depth psychology and the frameworks that Joseph Campbell spoke about, and myth and mysticism and all of these things. I've found a lot of healing in that.
Oh gosh, there's so much here. I mean, and one thing I think both share in is the role that adolescent anger plays in this whole kind of crisis that we are in as a culture, really around meaning making. You know, this whole mental health crisis, as we put in bunny quotes, like at its root, this is a crisis of meaning making. That the narratives we have internalized without even realizing it for telling stories about what it means to be human, about what it means to be a girl in this is what it means to be a boy. You know, we don't even realize that the things we're taking for granted are stories that we have been taught, cultural stories, and that mirror experience. What I left it with more than anything was anger, because I recognized that I was powerless as a child, that I was powerless over these big, powerful, these big invisible forces around me, and that I'd spent my whole life thinking that the purpose of being here was to perform, to be a good student, a good girl, a good this, a good that, and to realize, you know, that's the wisdom in adolescence. It's like I realized that was a story that I had been taught. A bullshit story, but because that I didn't have the language and I didn't have the frames of reference, and I hadn't read Joseph Campbell, and I hadn't found Huxley, and I had no one to guide me through that, and I got mad. All I could do was get mad, because that was the only emotion that felt powerful to me. I needed agency. I needed to feel like I had power, and anger, of course, angry girls are a recipe for being plopped down in front of a psychiatrist. And we look back through the history of psychiatry. And yeah, I'm curious, like for you, when you think about the voids that you are in, and actually, maybe I know where I want to take us, because you know, time is going to fly by before we know it. And I imagine that everyone in this room has perhaps read Betsy McKay's recent Wall Street Journal article about TikTok culture. And like when I look at the girls out there who are growing up online thinking that the meaning making of their life is the psychiatric paradigm. This is how I fit in. This is where I belong. This is who I am. I'm not alone. I'm understood. I can be validated. My heart aches. My heart aches because it's true. We are yearning for meaning and belonging. And I want to ask you, like, what's your, as a follower of this kind of cultural moment we're in, how are you making sense of, I guess, how do you see the way forward for those girls who are hungry like we once were for meaning, and only finding it right now in the kind of mental health framework?
I can see very clearly that. And I don't think we have a lot of members. Anyone that's a Gen Z, member of Gen Z in this audience? Okay, wow. Okay, so underrepresented AF, right? So, but I'm gonna say, and maybe you all can let me know if I'm right here, but I think Gen Z are sniffing the bullshit, right? They are not buying it anymore. They are, yeah, that's correct. Yeah, he's like, yes. They're not buying it. And the vast majority of my listeners are Gen Z and millennials, and they're not buying it. So they're not buying what the psychiatric industrial complex is selling anymore. And they're starting, and I do believe that the tide is turning. And so the answer to that, I think, is content like mine, content like the stuff that Nick is doing and what so many people are here doing. But they're hungry for deeper answers. They don't want an Instagram carousel about 3 top tips on how to calm your nervous system anymore. We have to like move past that. They want deeper meaning-making frameworks. Like Joanna spoke about R.D. Laing. Like, I love his work. I try to do my best to bring some of these things down from their high academic towers and give them in, and also I think Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung, R.D. Laing, Stanislav Grof, the Esalen Institute, all of these people, they did amazing stuff, but I think that it's not packaged in a way that's relevant for today. And I also think that there's a dire lack of like female voice in that. And what I try to do with my work is I talk a lot about descent and return, of like going down into the underworld of your experience. And when I heard you speak, Angie, like the visceral emotion that I see you, like the crying, we need to cry. We need to get fucking mad. And Laura said the clarifying power of female anger, right, is just so powerful. And I feel like we need to show our teeth, you know? We need to get angry. And I appreciate the message of positivity too, but I think that it needs a bit of a warrior spirit, right? I had no idea how deep the effed upness of the veteran stuff went. I was over there crying hearing it because I'm going like, it's like a Russian doll of fucked up. I'm sorry, I probably said the F-bomb more than the whole day. But it is, and it makes me feel that way. It makes me want to use that word in the truest sense of the word. It's not okay. And so to answer your question, Laura, they just need to be given this. They didn't know, just like we didn't know it existed. I interviewed an amazing girl, Sarah Mergen, and she goes by Carl Jung memes on Instagram. And when I interviewed her, she's Gen Z, and she goes, oh, I just grew up and my mom had books and shelves of Carl Jung's books, and I grew up reading Carl Jung. And I said, if only, right? Like, I was starving for that. And I'm not saying Carl Jung is the panacea of all things, but he did what I think that we need to do, which is, he never claimed that he invented that stuff, you know, neither did Joseph Campbell. They approached these ancient things with reverence, and they brought them into the culture and tried to seed them in. So that's what I'm trying to do with my work, is like seeding that in for a younger audience. And I'm doing my best, but that's what I think they need. They need something else.
And one of the things that I love so much about what you put out in the world is that it's art. You are creating art, and we live in such a vacuum in our culture, the pain that we all feel because it gets instantly funneled into the clinicalese and this sterile, cold, decontextualized, completely, you know, uncreative framework of, you know, disorders and labels and symptoms and illnesses and this and that. We've lost touch with this, the raw, you know, this deep well of raw humanness that we are meant to make art with. Your incredible Instagram profile where you're making art every day, your incredible podcasts. Like for me, it's writing. I can see many artists in this audience, other authors, painters. I think I'm so glad to hear your optimism, because I'm not as tapped into the Gen Z world as I should be as an elder millennial.
Oh, they're not having it.
I'm so happy to hear that, because we do. One of the tragedies of the medicalization of human experience is that it gives this synthetic sense of really a validation of your pain. Like, I want people to see how much pain I'm in, and like, look at all the diagnoses I have. See, this is how much pain I'm in. And how do we help young people realize, like, yes, your pain is real. Like, we've fucking felt it. I'll throw an F-bomb in to join you. I drop F-bombs like it's my job. My friends get really upset with me. And you know what we're doing? We model, we show, we're making art. Because when you describe your experiences in literary terms or through visual expression, like that's when you tap in that's when you reach someone's heart. And rather than like, oh, well, you know, I had symptoms of depressed symptoms and then some anxiety. Like, what does that even mean? Depression, what does that mean? It's such a mushy word. And I think I hope that we can reach people, young people, at that deeper level of yearning to be seen and understood in their pain, and then invite them to say, but you know what, actually, labeling yourself as mentally ill is doing the opposite of what you think it is. Yes. You're actually stripping yourself, your pain of meaning. Yes. And significance. Like, come over here, like, here's an easel and a canvas and some oil paints, like, have at it.
So brilliantly put. And I think that is the answer, is we need to show our teeth, we need catharsis, we need to share our stories like we're doing now, and choose something different, you know? And I do believe that we're all gathered in this room to do just that. And I've just been blown away. I've been over there crying, and while I've been listening to everyone talk, and 4 years ago when I started talking to that mic, yeah.
What you've built is amazing, Mollie. And honestly, if you are not familiar with her work right now, find it. The gift you are giving, the gift that so many people here are giving to alchemize pain and the degradation we go through as patients, there's all the things that we once felt so much shame about, to turn it into beautiful, painful, agonizingly exquisite art is the most empowering thing. It makes all of it worth it when you offer it to the world. And I hope, and the fact that there are only 2 Gen Z people in here, I'm glad you asked that question. Like, how do we, next year, how can we have like half the hands be young people in this room?
Yeah. Thank you, Laura.
Love you.